Hi, my name is Woody Mann, and in this lesson I'm going to be talking about the sounds and the styles and techniques of the early blues masters, the originators of the acoustic blues guitar tradition. People like Charlie Patton, Son House, Tommy Johnson, Lonnie Johnson, Scrapper Blackwell, and a lot of others. And rather than teach their songs directly off their recordings, what I've done is taken a lot of these sounds and techniques and distilled them into 5 easy-to-play pieces that I think better illustrate their techniques rather than getting lost in the transcriptions directly from the records. And you know, early roots of blues guitar is a very broad term. We don't know a lot about the early roots, but what we do know is what we have in terms of the recordings. And the one thing they all have in common is their ability to get a really great sound from the guitar. Rather than just playing the notes in terms of just the fingerstyle arrangements, it's just they knew how to get the sound of a guitar, the texture. And that's why we're going to be talking about techniques like brushing and damping and how to get a volume from the guitar. You know, and in many ways, the people that I mentioned earlier are the originators of the style, and they were the people that were influential to other blues players. So their music really represents the early influences of country music, of banjo, of open tunings and things like that, and gospel music. So there's a lot of influences that take place in their music. So it's a very rich tradition. And this lesson is a cross-section of those styles. So I do have some songs presented in standard tuning, some alter tunings, drop D tuning, open G tuning, and things like that. But the one kind of common denominator that they all have in common is this kind of technique where we're trying to get the volume, how to understand what you're playing, how to create variations in your own playing, and how to develop your picking technique, and most importantly, how to get certain sounds and textures from the guitar. All the things that are hard to get directly from books, that kind of thing. And I think once you have an understanding of this, then it's much easier to go directly to the recordings and learn from, if you want to learn from a Son House recording, to go to it, if you have kind of a general idea and the general approach to what they're playing. And I think it's a very exciting lesson. And what I did when I presented the songs, I played them written out exactly as I wrote them, nice and slowly, so you can follow along, also with some variations. And that's the nature of the music, is how to be spontaneous in your own playing. And so I included a lot of the variations, you know, at some points during the lesson to give you some ideas on how to do that. And I think that's something that's important. It's really at the center of this lesson, is to get this feeling that even if you're a beginning player, you want to get this sense of how to improvise, how to understand what you're playing, rather than just playing by rote. And that's the nature of this music. It's ultimately very simple music in terms of chords, in terms of the notes that we're playing, you know. But what makes it exciting is this fact that the great players and the music in general is this ability to do something with a song, to play it spontaneously, to play the melody a little different, to add syncopations, to change the texture. All these subtleties that are really like the main center of the music. And that's what I really want to focus on in this lesson. So this is not a beginner or advanced lesson. This is a lesson, I think, for all guitar players to kind of take note of this, and hopefully it'll have an impact in your playing, whatever style that you're playing. And I think the music of the early masters and the early roots are a good jumping off point to illustrate all these techniques. So this is going to be a real exciting lesson, and welcome aboard. So let's just get started. We'll get right into our first tune, and we'll just dig in. So here we go. All right, now let's get into tune. So here's your low E string. And your A. And your D. And G. B. And then your high E. I'd like to show you how to get into some of the tunings that we use in this lesson. First one is drop D. And for this, we're taking the E string, down one whole step to D. So you have the low D. Same as the 4th string. Now to get into drop D G tuning, we're taking the A string down one whole step to G. And here's your G. So in this tuning, you have a low D and a low G. then from there, what we're doing is to get into open G, full open G tuning, we're taking the high E string, moving that down one step, also to D. So here's your high E string that's now a D. Same as the sixth string, and the same as the fourth string. So open G tuning is low sixth string is the D note. And then on the fifth string you have the G note. Fourth string D note. And then G. And then B on the second string. First string, high string is D. So full open G. This tune is called Bullfrog Groan, and it's a great example of a folk blues theme that was very popular in the South. A lot of players had versions of this tune, Tommy Johnson, Willie Harris, and it's a very predominant theme, and it's played in drop D tuning. What I'd like to do is play it through once and then give you an idea of what's going on in the tune. I'll explain all the picking and all the chord techniques. You know, and as you can hear right away, it has that full, rich kind of sounding, that big, loud volume to it. And that's because I'm doing a lot of kind of strumming the pick rather than picking the pick. In other words, rather than reading from the tablature, just playing the notes, as you would in a normal kind of finger-picking context, what I'm doing is I'm playing more than one string when I play the bass. So I'm getting this kind of strum, almost sounds like I'm hitting all 6 strings kind of thing. You know, and the way we want to develop that is to really kind of relax the thumb and let it glide from string to string. You know, what's nice also about this song, it's a real set arrangement. In other words, the interplay between the bass and the melody is kind of a set little arrangement, and you can hear almost the dance-like quality to it, where you have that bass kind of punctuating the rhythm, and when you walk into a chord, the way the bass kind of falls into the next phrase, and a little kind of this kind of interplay between the two lines. And it's a good example to show that it's really so not about finger-picking pattern type approach. It's really just whatever the syncopation in the bass is against whatever the melody is. And it's really like two guitars, two separate instruments. And it's this kind of interplay between, kind of a question and answer type approach to playing, which to me, a lot of the early players from Mississippi had this wonderful way of orchestrating the guitar in a dance-like manner, very different than the ragtime players like Blind Blake and things. And in this lesson, we're going to get into the music of Charlie Patton and Tommy Johnson, a lot of the great players from that area. But the one thing they did have in common is this ability to get the volume from the guitar, to play loud and to play swinging and to really play with that rhythmic bass that kind of is the underlying feeling and thematic material of the tune. And I think one way to start doing that is to play the tablature as written, but also kind of relax the bass. And what I'm doing here is, instead of playing one string, I'm kind of strumming the pick. You know, in this song, it's a very simple arrangement where it's only 3 or 4 riffs, basically. And the first 4 bars are out of a D chord, and it's pretty much just the bass. bass line, and then D chord, and I'm walking up, you know, with these octaves, and then a little alternate bass riff, and then back to the octaves. So in the whole first 4 bars, it's really only the bass. And what's happening in the melody is just sort of punctuating the rhythm. This kind of idea. So the melody is just little chops here and there, you know. And when I move to the next chord, the G, the position is the 2nd string 3rd fret, the 5th string 2nd fret, of course the 1st string 1st fret. And here I'm playing the bass first, and then the melody. You know, and when I play with the fingers, I'm doing a similar idea. Instead of just playing this, I'm brushing. Kind of like this sloppy pick. And when you listen to some of the old recordings, it has that kind of loping, sloppy quality to it, yet it's very articulate. So I think that's what adds to the volume and swing of the music. So here you can hear the bass, melody, bass, melody. And then going on, the next section, D, is this little kind of interplay between bass and melody. You got this. And if you listen to the bass isolated, you have this. That kind of rhythmic bass. And the melody, pop, pop. You know, together you have that. That kind of thing. And that's a good phrase to just play by itself and just practice. Just that D, that 7th and 8th bar, just the D chord, just so you have that interplay back, and just play, you know, make sure you're just playing whatever is supposed to be played with the thumb, and with the fingers, The phrase, the overall sound of that phrase is this kind of, strumming kind of rhythmic thing, only you're doing it with your fingers. And then moving on to the A, kind of walking into the A 7th, melody, bass. So you have the bass, melody, bass, bass, melody, and walking into the G. So you have this bass line kind of walking in right through the chords. Then you repeat the G part and back to the D part. So once you get that D phrase, the G phrase, and the A phrase, that's the whole tune. You know, and it's really kind of a succinct little arrangement. It's very, very good way to illustrate a lot of the techniques in this lesson. And then what I did is I put in one alternate first 4 bars of the D, which is instead of this bass riff, you have this. And just walking down, 1st and 2nd string, D chord, and then a little, it's another riff that Tommy Johnson uses, a riff similar to that in some of his songs like Canned Heat, and then it goes. And that's it, and then right back to the G. So you just pick up the first 4 bars and you pick it up on bar 5. And so you can really hear that interplay between the two. So again, what we want to do here is just play it nice and slowly, kind of real sloppy, kind of relaxed right hand, and a lot of brushing and ideas like that. So let's play this tune. What I'll do is I'll play it very slowly now. I'll play it exactly as written so you can play along. So this is Bullfrog Groan. The G, and then into that D riff, bass, melody, bass, bass, and then A, This next song is called Delta Blues for Patton, and it's an example of some of the early sounds in the key of E, based on the playing, of course, Charlie Patton. And a lot of the licks and a lot of the phrases in this tune are used by Patton in other songs and a lot of the other early greats from the Mississippi Delta. And so what I did is I kind of distilled it down, a lot of those sounds, into this song. So let me play it through once, and you get an idea of the sounds, and then, of course, I'll talk it through and get into all the specifics. So this is Delta Blues for Patton. You know, and as you can hear right away, you hear that big, full, brushy kind of sound on the guitar in that key of E, using that kind of open string idea. You know, very similar to the approach of players using open tunings, where you have that just, instead of that bass, where this kind of sound where you're really moving through, and that's kind of a running theme of this lesson. Just how to get that relaxed strum-like sound in the thumb, especially, and even in the melody, where you use a lot of the upbrushing and that kind of thing. And the key of E is a beautiful key to do that in because you have a lot of open strings, and you get these sounds very much like the approach of open tunings, where you're playing chords with one note or two notes. And you get these kind of clusters of sounds. So even though it's, and this is a 12-bar blues in E, using E, A, and B, it uses different sounds of each chord. The A chords might be the B chords. You know, so it gives the music this beautiful kind of haunting, kind of open, brushy sounding quality to it. And also part of it is also the volume, as we discussed in the other songs, is just how to get this real full sound. And even though this, and you could sense that this is a dance style also, very different than the ragtime approach where you have that kind of tighter sound. But it's a great way to open up your technique away from the finger picking, the alternating bass and pattern, Travis picking, kind of folk picking, just to kind of relax your hands. So a lot of the techniques that you learn in these songs are really applicable to many other styles of blues and other contemporary styles of music too. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to kind of talk the song slowly through so you can kind of see some of the positions, and you start to see the simplicity in it. You know, so understanding what's happening isn't that difficult. The hard part, the difficult part, is just sort of relaxing into the physicality of this new way of playing. And I think that just takes time. And these songs, this one is written out sort of like a study, an etude, and I distilled a lot of the sounds of Charlie Patton, Willie Brown, Tommy Johnson, a lot of the early innovators, their music into these 12 bars, using a lot of licks from them, some of my own riffs, that kind of thing, just to kind of illustrate these techniques. And I think this is a real good approach rather than to try to go right to a Charlie Patton recording, for instance, because that's difficult. Sometimes it's difficult to listen to, and I think once you get an understanding of kind of these little tone clusters he's playing and this kind of strum-like technique, it'll be a lot easier to go to the recording. So this is Delta Blues for Patton, and it starts out with a 2-bar intro, just to kind of set the stage. And basically what I'm doing here, it's an E chord. And he uses a similar riff in one of his songs called Green River Blues. And what it is, it's a very lazy strum effect, where your thumb is coming down to the 6th string, to the 3rd string, and you're hammering. And as you're hammering, you're kind of brushing the strings. And then you're hammering on the 5th string, open to 2nd fret, and then back to the 3rd string hammer. And just think of that as a little exercise to do, and just kind of get that feel. So the whole sound would be this. Without the brushing, it would be. So it is kind of a steady bass, and with the brushing. Almost like you're strumming the guitar, but only doing it in the context of picking. So you really want to see that. And then the song starts out in the 3rd bar. That's the beginning of the 12-bar sequence. It starts out with just 2 notes, 1st and 3rd string on the 7th fret, and keep that open B string. And the bass here would be the 6th and the 3rd string. Ending up in this D shape on the 7th and 8th fret. So you have this full sound. And then right back to an E chord. And then a little bass riff, back to an E chord. Hammer. E7. Let me play that one more time, just that first 4 bars of the E. Goes 7th fret. Very relaxed, and then E. Just a little bass. Now the A, you have this little kind of interplay with the bass and melody. And the bass kind of moves right through. Bass. All the way to the 3rd string. And the melody is really just this. It's not much of a melody, but it's that between the two. And then it repeats. So you can see it's right out of an A7th chord, and it's real simple, but has that nice bass. And then we're going to play an E chord right up to the, just 1 string, 5th string, 7th fret, to the 4th fret, to the 3rd fret, and then, and on top of that you have this, just the open strings. And if you hit the 3rd string, that's okay too. And then right back to an E chord. So that phrase you have, if you notice sometimes I cut the strings. And the B, playing the B with the 2nd and 5th string on the 2nd fret, so it's kind of this open, instead of the B7 without that note. So you have the bass here is 5 and 3, to the 4th fret, both strings, and then a little, no bass, just melody, and then it flips right to the bass. And then the last 2 bars are just this kind of variation on that strum pick. And now the B section, the B position rather, and then it's a little tricky. So you have this E, then the B, and then see the whole song is just sort of hinting at the chords, using a lot of these unusual, and really using the guitar, all the properties of the open strings to get that sound. And that's why obviously the key of E is very much used in a lot of Patton's music. And if you listen to his Pony Blues and Stone Pony and tunes like that, or Green River Blues, sometimes he's doing very simple things, but it's the way he's playing it that just gives it that groove and that sound. And in this music, the sound is everything, the sound and the groove. So that's why, again, it's a good idea to go to the tab, learn the songs, memorize it, then get rid of the tab, and then really try to just relax into getting that sound. So let me play this song through once, really slowly, exactly as I've written it out, so you can follow along, and then we'll move on from there. So this is Delta Blues for Patton, real slow. Here we go. This next tune is called Jackson Moan, and it's an example of open tunings, open G tuning, and it is an example of some of the early sounds, some of the banjo-like sounds of the Mississippi players, and this is really part of the vocabulary of the early blues players like Robert Johnson, Son House, Charlie Patton, and many, many others. So let me play it through once so you can get the sound of this beautiful tradition of guitar playing, and then we'll get into the specifics. This is Jackson Moan. All right, Jackson Moan. And first of all, we're in open G tuning. So to get there from standard tuning, I'm taking the E string down to D, the A string down to G, and the high E string also down to D. So you have D, G, D, G, And you can hear right away this very much of a full, rich kind of, very much brushing, those techniques we talked about. And here you can really hear it. And it's very much of a banjo approach. And a lot of the early players used open tunings for just that effect, because it was very, in some ways, easy to play, because you're not playing full chords. You're playing a lot of banjo-like approaches, playing one note at a time, that kind of thing. And you could do a lot of interesting little flourishes and rhythmic ideas with your picking hand. And plus, you can get that full strum the guitar. You know, get all these kind of rhythmic ideas happening with this big, full kind of strumming idea. And what I did is I distilled a lot of the riffs from Robert Johnson and Charlie Patton, Son House, into these 12 bars, just to give you some ideas of how to approach this. And I'll break it down, and it may sound a little complicated, but once you see what's happening, it's really not in a lot of ways. And there's no pattern to it, and you can really hear the two lines here, especially when you hear that bass thing. Sometimes there's nothing happening but just the bass, and all of a sudden the melody kind of answers, and again it's this orchestrated way of playing the guitar, and the bass of course provides the kind of the rhythmic drive of the piece. Plus there's different textures you can get. You can hit the strings, you can brush a lot of the strings, so it's really full of these different tone colors, and it's a wonderful tradition. You can hear this open G tuning was maybe, you know, just as almost popular as standard tuning was to the early players. And if we start out with just some of the riffs, and even though it's in a 12-bar framework, there's first riff I chose was this G riff here, this G7th riff, and that's played with the top two strings, 5th fret, the second string 6th, and the third string 7th, and you're kind of lifting up that string. And even in the first few phrases, you can see the bass is just, we have just that one bass note, and then the melody, and then a little variation here. Little slight variations of the same idea, and then phrase like that, where the bass is and the rhythm is one, bass. And there's no bass notes. You have that. A lot of the players would do this kind of hitting of the guitar, and you hear a lot of this kind of frailing technique. So all these different sounds would come out in a tune like this. And every time, let's say, Charlie Patton would play it, every verse would be slightly different. He'd flip the rhythm. Sometimes there'd be the accent on the upbeat, sometimes on the downbeat. But I think if we just kind of lay it out like this, you get a nice kind of roadmap of some of the basic riffs. So if I play the first 4 bars of G, it goes like this. A little bass. Then going on, a little bass again. Very, very specific. So all the bass is really just in each bar. Nothing else but that, and everything else is that kind of question and answer with the melody. And also it's interesting, try to get a different texture. The bass is kind of sharp, the melody is kind of brushing. And then we get to the C on the 5th bar, it's on the 5th fret, and here the same idea applies. The melody. Bass riff, and reach over with your pinky to hit that 5th string 9th fret, just to kind of kick off the bass, and then and you can see again, bass, melody, bass, melody. And now an interesting riff that Patton would play. That is now I'm hitting the 2nd string open and the 3rd string 3rd fret. You get that kind of dissonance, and then 4th string 2nd fret. So it's this kind of phrase. and then open, G7. That's a little tricky. Let me play that slow again. And then into the D, which is just one note, and you're implying this chord here, D7. And then no bass, so you got, you just let it hang, and then this little last riff. 4th string, and then 6th string, 5th fret, octave. Then open, and G. So you can see in each part, it's just whatever the bass is, then this little melody riff. So it's a very kind of set arrangement. So, and when you're playing this, it's a good idea to experiment with this tune. And what I would say is just sort of get the overall kind of feel of this idea of the bass and against the melody. And I'll be laying out some of the chord positions, the C here, the D here, the C over here, the D7. In the section on variations, and we'll get into some more variations on the piece. But for right now, let me play the song nice and slowly, as it's written out, so you can follow along. And this is Jackson Moan. This next song is called Blue Daze, and it's based primarily on the playing of Scrapper Blackwell, great Indianapolis guitar player, very influential player. And it's in the key of A, and it uses a lot of the same techniques as some of the other songs, only now we start getting into a little more playing off the chords in terms of single line riffs on top. So let me play it through once, and then we'll get into it. This is Blue Daze. Yeah, and right away you can hear some of the similarities, in the other tunes, in terms of that brushing, getting that real full sound. But at the same time, you have these kind of little melodic lines that connect the chord positions. And the other departure from the other songs is this bass is primarily steady. You have that kind of on the beat bass, but also you can hear how brushy it is and how muddy, in a sense, it's those basses. So you have this kind of hard driving, brushy kind of bass against this very articulate top line. And Scrapper Blackwell played with great piano player Leroy Carr, and in many ways he developed his style because with the piano he developed this kind of snapping top line to be heard over the volume of the piano, and the bass is primarily that rhythm. And if you listen to the music of Robert Johnson, songs like Kind-Hearted Woman Blues, you can hear how Robert Johnson took a lot of Scrapper's ideas and sort of made it his own. So Scrapper Blackwell was a very influential player, one of the most unsung heroes, I think, of early acoustic blues guitar. Really, truly one of the originators. And there's a lot in his playing there's a lot to learn from his playing in terms of not only the approach and how he got his sound from the guitar, but just some of his sheer melodic ideas and how he approached the chords and things. So this is based on his playing, and it shows some of his primary riffs, and I threw some of my own things in there. And if you go to his recordings, you'll hear a lot of these riffs in his recordings, or this kind of approach. And so let's get into the tune. Let me just kind of show you what's going on. It's a 12-bar blues in A, and it basically uses an A chord and a D7th chord. And with the D, he plays with his thumb over the top, and a regular D chord with the thumb over the top. That's how he gets that kind of brushy bass on the D. And the other chord he uses is a diminished chord, which is played with the 1st and 3rd string on the 5th fret, and the 2nd and 4th string on the 4th fret, and then back to the A. So he uses that diminished against the A chord, And on top of that, he puts a little moving melodic line, and then back to the A, and then D7, and then back to the A. So the first 4 bars, it starts out with A, into the diminished, and then back into the A from the top, and then a little walk through, D7, and then back to the A. You hear that, these pretty little lines going through. Then the 5th bar starts out with a D chord, and here you just lift up the 1st string, diminished, and then back to the A, and then a little bass riff, and then E, walk into the E, a little, always put these little melodic ideas on top, and then diminish, back to the A. So it's pretty much the same positions. And once you get this kind of moving from the A to the D, you have 50% of the tune. And the second verse starts out with a little break he did. 1st and 3rd, 9th to 7th to 5th, and it repeats, and then right into the A chord. Then a little single line riff, 1st string, and then just like the first verse. This is a repeat. And here, make sure when you hit in the bass, you got that brush. And diminish. And right back to the A. Just like before. Exactly the same. A lot of the material in the second verse and the first verse are the same, really. The only difference primarily is the first 4 bars of the second verse with that break. And it's a good idea, once you get this down, to kind of mix and match the riffs. You can take the bass riff from the second verse, put it in the first verse. And I think this roadmap gives you a good, some good ideas in terms of how to, some new ways of going from chord to chord and kind of weaving through the chord. But remember, here the objective is to try to really separate the bass and melody, not only in terms of the rhythm and things, but in terms of the texture, in terms of the tone. So the bass might be this kind of muddy kind of bass, and the melody very clear. Very clear line. And that's how he got this big, full, rich sound at the same time. Almost sounded like he was just riffing. You know, and it's a fascinating way of playing. So if you can get a hold of some Scrapper recordings, I recommend it. There's a lot there. And so what I'd like to do now is play it. I'll play it exactly as I've written it out. This way you can follow along and see it in the music, what's going on with Blue Daze by Scrapper. Here we go. This next song is called Shuffle in G, and it's in an unusual tuning and uses a lot of the sounds of some of the early great players, people like Big Joe Williams, and it uses that shuffle beat, that kind of 12/8 feel, which I'll be talking about more in a minute. But let me play it through once so you can get the sound of the song in your ears, and then we'll get into all the specifics. This is Shuffle in G. And Shuffle in G. And the way I was playing this is in unusual tuning where I'm taking the E string, bringing that down to D, and taking the A string and bringing it down to G. So I have this sort of drop D-G tuning. And this is a tuning that was used by quite a few players, people like Lonnie Johnson especially, where a lot of this song is based on the playing of his music. And he recorded a song called Blues in G that had a little different feel to it, but many of the same riffs and things. And it's a wonderful tuning because it works well in the key of D or the key of G. And the top four strings, since they're standard tuning, you can use a lot of the shapes and riffs in standard tuning, but you have this nice low G bass, so you can use all these kind of high G riffs. And the approach is similar to open G tuning, except it is actually open G tuning with a high E string. So you have that. And it's a good one to illustrate this shuffle idea, this kind of, this feel that sometimes is felt in 12/8. So it's like a slow 4, like instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, you have that kind of 1, 2, 4, 7, 10, 11, 12, that kind of shuffle beat. So you have that. We hear a lot in Lonnie's music where you have a very delicate way of playing, and you hear it in Joe Williams' music, Big Joe Williams, where you hear that kind of shuffle beat. You hear a lot in Robert Johnson's music. It's kind of a recurring thread in a lot of people's music, Robert Johnson. So you have that kind of shuffle thing. And what's happening here is the thumb, instead of this alternating bass, you have this kind of just drone-like. Normally you hear that with that kind of shuffle bass. And here we're using the same feel, but without that melodic figure kind of thing. And on top, we're just playing some riffs on each chord. So it's got that nice feel to it that was very similar to Clarksdale Moan and some of the other Delta blues for Patton, in that it still has that full, rich kind of brush-like bass, but the melody, like the other piece, the Scrapper piece, has a lot of like melodic ideas on top. So it's a wonderful piece to kind of get into and experiment with in this tuning, because there's a lot of possibilities, and people like Bo Carter also played some ragtime sounds in this tuning. So it's a good one to experiment, and certainly Lonnie Johnson is someone to listen to in terms of early influences, and he was one of the best-selling recording artists in blues, and he was very influential, including to musicians like Robert Johnson, who based a lot of his material on the playing of Lonnie Johnson. So it starts out in this G, using a lot of these G riffs that you'd use in standard tuning, moving down, you know, and with the bass underneath it, you have this. This kind of shuffle, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. It takes a while getting used to playing that shuffle beat with a melody on top. That kind of sound. And sometimes the bass is just on the downbeat. And sometimes has that shuffle beat to it. And then moving on to as it goes on into the third measure, it moves to a C chord, which is the fifth measure, actually. Second string, first fret, just like you'd finger a C chord in standard tuning. And then it goes to an E flat seventh chord, which is a D seventh moved up 1 fret. And then right back to G, and then G7. You know, it's a good idea to get used to that riff here, all the riffs are based out of that one position. When it goes to the D, it's very interesting. This is straight out of Lonnie Johnson. Then the bass drops out. You're walking right through a D seventh chord. And then to G. And then back to that same old variation of that riff. Sometimes sometimes you have that variation. Sometimes it's, different subtleties of the same riff. But here, it's a short song, and the goal here is to just kind of get that brushy sound with that shuffle rhythm to it. And don't be so concerned necessarily with playing the shuffle rhythm on every beat. Sometimes you can do it on a few measures, and then kind of put it on other measures, put it right on the downbeat. And the idea is just to get that kind of lazy. What I would do is play it through just with the chords, without the riffs. And just to kind of get the overall feel of the piece. Once that's comfortable, then start putting in some of the single string riffs. Okay, now I'm going to play it through nice and slowly, so you can play it as I've written it out. One thing to bear in mind, when you look at the music, I wrote it out in 12/8, and you can see, for instance, in that first measure, the top line is written in groups of 3. And to get the shuffle beat, one thing that might be helpful is try to put the bass on the first and the third note of each of those 3 notes. So for instance, in that first beat and that second beat, you have those 3 notes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So it's a good thing to bear in mind and kind of get that coordination between the 2 lines. So here it is, nice and slow. Flat 7th chord, steady bass, and back to the G. 1, 2, 3. Walk into the D, 1 bass, G, I'd now like to go over some of the general techniques and variations that be helpful in playing a lot of these songs. And there's a few techniques that are sort of common to all the songs, techniques like brushing and damping and ways of playing off the chords that I'd like to kind of go over now that I think will be very helpful. For instance, one of the most common techniques that are common to all of these are this brushing idea, where you're hitting more than one bass and trying to get this kind of lazy strum-like effect. And you could certainly hear it in the Delta Blues for Patton and in the Jackson Moan, especially, where you have that full kind of sound. And for instance, if we were playing the Delta Blues for Patton piece, that blues in E, if we just were to play just a normal E chord and didn't do anything else in terms of the riffs and things, but just picked it, let's say we had an alternating 6/4 bass. One thing you want to try now is let's start getting this louder and fuller sound. It almost sounds like I'm strumming the guitar, but yet I'm still have that alternating bass. And as I do it, I'm hammering the top string. It's kind of hammering that third string. And then let's go to that B chord that's also used in that song, which is the 3rd and 5th string on the 2nd fret. And go back to E. So what I'll do is just a little riff that goes from the E to the B, back to the E. And it's going to go like this. If I just picked it without the strum, then the B, and then what I'm doing here is, then I'm hammering. So I'm going E, bass on the B is the 5th and the 3rd string. And I got that kind of nice kind of sound. So you want to be conscious of getting this brushing idea. And as I'm doing it, I'm dampening with the left hand. In this case, the E chord, I can either collapse the chord or use my pinky. And the whole goal is just to go from E to B, back and forth with that sound. So you have this. And you may come up with your own ways to do the damping. It's just something to shoot for, that kind of back and forth. E chord's a little tricky to damp because you have those open strings. So you have to, in my case, I'm using a pinky as sort of a damper. Just like if you have the chord A to damp, I'm using my fingers to damp it. Whereas if I have the chord G, I can just kind of collapse the chord. So what I suggest doing is just play a series of chords with a nice alternating bass. G, play with that kind of brush damping kind of effect. And just kind of get that in your ears and your hands and just kind of move around with that. And I think another technique that'll be helpful too is this idea of the shuffle beat that we talked about in one of the tunes, the shuffle in G, where in the shuffle beat what's very interesting with that is you're sort of subdividing the beat. And the shuffle beat sound is this kind of typical blues thing that we all have heard. This kind of shuffle groove thing. And sometimes you see it written out in 12/8, meaning instead of breaking it up into 4/4 to a bar, 4 beats to a bar, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Since you're subdividing that beat, we're doing it in 12. We're thinking of each beat divided into 3 parts. So we have 4 beats divided into 3. So we have 4. First beat would be 1, 2, 3. Second beat, 1, 2, 3. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And so by doing that, you can really subdivide each beat into those 3 parts and feel it. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So in the shuffle beat, you're putting it on the 1 and the 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So this way you can make it a little more exacting than kind of guessing. 1, 2. If you count in 4, there's a lot of space between the beats. So it's always a good idea to subdivide. And when you're playing it in the key of E, for instance, you want to think of that slow 12/8. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, that kind of thing. And this way, when you're playing a slow blues, you have more places to play it. 1, 2, 3. You can accent on the 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can kind of play around where you want to put the accenting. So it's kind of it's a fun thing and a very useful thing useful way of thinking about the rhythm. You know, and if we apply it to the shuffle beat, the shuffle in G, where we have that drop D G tuning. I'm taking the E string down to D and the A string down to G. And you saw in that song when I was talking it through, you had that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. There's that shuffle beat in the open G tuning. And you have that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 3, 4. So it's on the first and third beat of each measure, of each subdivided measure. 1, 2, 3. Now what you can do to get used to on top is now think of your fingers saying, well, I'm going to put it on the first and the third of each, which would be together with the bass. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That kind of thing. Or I can put it on just the 1. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So now I'm creating different effects between the bass and the melody. And let's say I want to put it on just the 3. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So with the thumb is doing 1 and 3, you can put the fingers on the 1 or the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So now the thumb is playing on the second piece of each beat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. And the bass is on the 1 and the 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So it sounds a lot more complicated than it is, but once you kind of get the feel of it, it's kind of fun because then you can train your hand to try to play 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, all this kind of thing. And then after a while you kind of internalize it. But it's a good idea to kind of break it down very slowly because you can train your hands to do different things. So that's one good aspect of the shuffle beat and breaking down the time into 12/8 that can be very helpful. Now for instance, if we went into open G tuning from here, where Jackson Moan is in, and here we can do the same thing with the shuffle beat, and we could also do the same concepts certainly with the brushing techniques. So for instance, the first part of the Jackson Moan, you have this kind of choreography between the two. What I would recommend doing is just take a typical 12-bar blues in open G and play the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord here, or the 1 chord, and the 4 chord, the C chord here, and then the D7th, which is just like in standard tuning, just lifting up the first string with the open D bass. So I have the 3 chords, and just play a general kind of 12-bar blues with a steady bass, but brush on both directions. Brush with your thumb down and brush with your fingers up, just to get that kind of basic groove. Kind of relax your hand. Just to kind of feel that bass. Concentrate on getting a good sound. So it almost sounds like you're just strumming the guitar, but you have this. And then slowly you can bring in the riffs. Just play around the 12 bar. So as I start, as I'm adding all the fancier riffs on top, I'm still keeping that basic groove because that's the whole feeling of the tune. You never want to break that. So I think it's always a good idea to develop technique where you really feel solid and then start slowly layering in the things, because otherwise what ends up happening is you could memorize very complicated tunes but you don't know what to do with it and you're kind of stuck there. So I think the approach should be the way I usually approach the music, and I think a lot of the old-timers used to approach it the same way. It's just you play what you know, even if it's simple vocabulary, but you get into more depth of it in terms of the sound, the texture, and the tone. So these are just general ideas, these brushing techniques, the damping with the left hand, and this kind of shuffle idea, where you can kind of use all those throughout all these songs, and you know, just kind of take it outside the context of the songs, and also memorize the tunes and let the songs themselves become the exercises to get you there, to develop your technique. Play everything slow, and I would definitely recommend to learn from the tab, but once you have it learned, get rid of the tab and play it by memory, because that's really the next step in getting into the music. So hopefully these tips will be helpful in playing all the music on this in this lesson. So, okay, now we'll move on. All right, that brings us to the end of this lesson, and I've enjoyed the lesson. I hope you did also. And now that we worked on these 5 songs and talked about a lot of the techniques, I think it's always a good idea to go right back to the original voices of the guitar, the early originators, and listen to their recordings, and you know, try to learn directly from the recordings themselves, and really try to listen to the sound and try to, you know, glean what you can just from their musicality. And also, I think the lesson here is try to create your own variations. Use these songs as just a kickoff point for your own, you know, your own improvisations. And you know, all of these songs, they beckon for more variations and things like that. So I hope you have a good time with that, and you know, good luck. And hopefully, this music will have a great impact on your playing. So, hope to see you at some Acoustic Sessions workshop down the road. And until then, good luck.